Thank you, Julie. It's nice to be together and to uplift our morning with some Torah study as we prepare for Shabbat. I want to keep in our prayers and in our thoughts our Jewish community members in South Florida and Aventura who are really suffering a great loss, the building that imploded yesterday. And so I just want to keep them in our prayers and in our thoughts as we go into Shabbos for full recovery and healing to the members of that community, and to give the first responders the strength to find even those people who are still missing. So let's go ahead and begin our session with a prayer for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Amen. I see at least one person from my congregation here, Steve Shepard. So shalom, boker tov, and to everyone who's joining us from everywhere. 57 of my closest friends, and then some, because we've got some couples in boxes here, maybe whole families in your home or studying Torah this morning. So Yasher Koach, may your strength continue. I would like to share my screen. I have a text here that I put together, a text study on Sefaria. If you by any chance had it prior to this moment and printed it out, well, I've updated it since then. So, you know, those Torah study teachers were updating to the last minute. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And here we go. Okay, great. So, you know, I love for this to be as interactive as possible. Of course, there are limitations on Zoom, but if you have questions as we go along, I'll pause as we go through. If you have a burning question or obviously any technical difficulties, please reach out to Julie, and she'll help navigate the questions, comments, or anything you need from the tech side. So I wanted to explore this morning what it means to be a disciple of Balaam or a disciple of Abraham. These two are sort of pitted one against the other in rabbinic tradition. Looking at Mishnah Avot in Pirkei Avot. So we're going to go right to that. And what we'll explore this morning is, what does it mean to be a disciple of Balaam or a disciple of Abraham? So we're going to be exploring the texts in which these two are compared to each other. We're going to look at the sources, at the Torah, and sort of bring out or highlight the difference between these two. But we're also thinking about how their characteristics play out in our own lives, right? So this is a narrative. It's a character study of these two characters in the Bible, but it's also I'm opening this discussion up, or at least for a reflection piece, on how the characteristics that are played out in their texts sort of are reflected in our own lives. Okay, so let's keep this text in front of us, like sort of mentally. When God says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you and curse him that curses you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. This whole question of blessing and curses is, right, the most prominent theme in Parashat Balak, because Balaam, right, so just a little synopsis before we begin. Balaam is this famous sorcerer, right? And we have the king of Midian, Balak, who is looking out, and he sees the Israelites encamped around them, and he's like, I gotta get rid of these people. He doesn't just go to war. Like, this is kind of a great question. If Balak was so threatened by this populous nation, I mean, surely he had the riches, the wealth, the ability to go to war against them, but he doesn't do that. He knows that they're also a spiritual people, that they're protected by God. He hires a sorcerer to somehow undo their blessing, right? Because maybe he's familiar with this idea that the Israelites are blessed, right? But maybe he didn't realize that those who curse them will be cursed. Maybe he didn't get that memo. So he's trying to figure out how to undo the blessing of the Israelites. And so he hires Balaam, who's a well-known sorcerer and a prophet even amongst the nations, and thinks that's like the way to go? Well, as you know, it's a really a great story. If you haven't opened up Tanakh to read Parashat Balak, or if you haven't read it lately, it's a good one. It's very colorful. Some people even wonder what it's doing in the Tanakh, because it's super colorful with a talking donkey after all. And there are a lot of parallels in other literature, forms of cultural narratives. So there's something about this story that just, it's like, it's a spiritual story, but it's a story about anti-Semitism. So of course it relates to us to this very day. In every generation, we learn in the Haggadah, there are those who rise up against us, to curse us, to annihilate us. And we see it in this week's Torah portion. So Balaam does his best to try to curse the Israelites, but he can't, because God is basically telling him what to see and what to say, and the words just aren't coming out the way he intends them. So we'll explore that a little bit more together. And then in the end, spoiler alert, okay? So Balaam is not able to curse the people, but he does have insight, okay? And we'll see how this word about vision, about seeing, is kind of a leitmotif throughout the text. So Balaam doesn't have the ability to curse them, but he has the ability to see into what is the Achilles heel of the Israelites. And so in the end of the Parsha, he is able to undo the people, not with a curse, but by directing them toward licentious behavior, and directing them toward idolatry. And that, we know, is, that's the Achilles heel for the people, and they're undone in that way, bringing aggression onto their own people, like a civil war kind of experience there, and a plague, and that brings us into next week's Torah portion. So we're not going to fully go there, but I want to explore how the characteristics of Balaam and Abraham are again contrasted to one another. And as we explore these texts, we're asking ourselves, what are we? Are we the disciples of Abraham, or are we the disciples of Balaam? And if, God forbid, we have any bit of Balaamness in us, how can we transform that characteristic within us to sort of move that needle more to the side of the Abraham? Right? So let's go ahead and jump in. So this is from the, again, Pirkei Avot. And in Pirkei Avot, it says, ethics of the sages, this is a Mishnaic piece, whoever possesses these three things is of the disciple of Abraham, our father. And whoever possesses three other things is of the disciples of Balaam, the wicked. Okay, what are they? A good eye, a humble spirit, and a moderate appetite. Very nice, okay? Ayin tova, good eye. Ruach nimucha, that's the lowly spirit. There are many different ways to understand these words. And the nefesh shvela, modest appetite, these are the Abraham people. What's the other side? An evil eye. So we're looking at an ayin ra'ah, haughty spirit, ruach givoha, and limitless appetite, nefesh rachava, right? A person who's like taking up a lot of space, okay? Not physically, but like with their appetite, with their needs, with their wants, with what we call gashmi, with their like physicality. So what's the difference between the disciples of Abraham, our father, and the disciple of Balaam, the wicked? The disciples of Abraham, our father, enjoy this world and inherit the world to come. Right? They enjoy this world. And it actually says it so beautifully. Lahanchil ohave yesh. Yesh. You got yesh in this world. Yesh is a nice Hebrew word. It means it's like substance. If you're living a substantive life, a meaningful life, that's a life of yesh. Right? That person is rewarded. And on the other hand, disciples of Balaam, the wicked, they inherit Gehennim, right? So it's like a hellish experience and descend into the nethermost pit. And then there's a quote to substantiate that idea. So before we even move on, I wanted to look at this very beginning. Kol mi sheyesh beyado shlosha dvarim halalu. Right? The Hebrew it's a little bit more than whoever possesses these three things. In Hebrew, it's kol mi sheyesh beyado. Who has these characteristics in their hands? If you've got something in your hand, it's like, you've got it. This is you. This is how you roll. This is how you live, right? For those of us who talk with our hands, right? It's what you own. It's the life you live that you're really living it. And I love that locution because it's just like powerful. It's yesh losha dvarim halalu biyado. You've got this in your hands, okay? And then the other piece that I want to point out is that these characteristics, okay, are not specifically and limited to, oh, actually I have the note here. We'll just read it. This is from the Hertz commentary. I have a lot of commentaries to the Pirkei Avot, and it's really great because Pirkei Avot, I mean, if you're into studying Musar, ethics, and some of Pirkei Avot is a little problematic, but most of it is just like, there's a lot to grab from there. And I only mean the problematic part, like there's one that's like, don't speak to women too often, it'll lead you astray. There are things like that I don't love, right? But most of Pirkei Avot is like, yesh kind of stuff. Anyway, so this one of the commentaries that I have, it's an older commentary from 1945, and it says, by the time this Mishnah was composed, the figure of Balaam had come to typify low heathen viciousness of thought and action. The contrast is not between Abraham and Balaam, doesn't end there, but between their disciples. Who is a disciple of Abraham? Who is a disciple of Balaam? That's us, right? How do we see ourselves, right? A religious system is judged not by its founders, but by the lives of those who follow and live after them. Okay, I'll have to fix that up afterwards, okay? It's not just about the founders, it's about us. It's the people who live in that religious system, right? That's what you look at to see what is the ethics of this people. Right? How do these people live? What are their priorities? Do you have a Balaam priority or you have an Abraham priority? Okay, so let's move on. Good question if anyone wants to know. Why is Balaam given prophecy in the first place? You just saw, he's an awful guy, right? Evil eye, haughty, egotistical. Why does this guy have prophecy? Right? Shouldn't that be retained for the tzaddikim, the righteous people, right? The people who have like the clear path, the good eye, the humble spirit. Why is this guy given prophecy? Well, Rashi gives one answer, and then I learned another answer recently. So Rashi says it's kind of like a safety, like a security deposit. You don't want the other nations, okay, the Goyim, they shouldn't say, God, you didn't give us half a chance. The Jewish people, the Israelites, they had Moses, they had Abraham, they had Joshua. Who do we get? We didn't have prophets. Well, God's saying, here you go, you have a prophet. You have someone who had every single ability, just as much as them, to do good, to lead you to good, to have that connection. You'll see in the text, reading through, I'm only giving us snippets of text, but if you read through the whole Torah portion, God is speaking with Balaam. This guy definitely has prophecy, okay? He definitely has the line of connection, right? But it's what he does with the connection that's problematic, right? So it's not that Balaam wasn't given a chance to do good, because he could have. It's just that he kept going back to his innate characteristics that were kind of yucky, right? That were problematic, where he just, he couldn't bring himself to a higher level to do the good that God would have wanted him to do with that gift. So too bad. Didn't work out for Balaam. But there's another answer, if you don't like that one, and I like this one better, that prophecy was gifted to Balaam. Right? If you know anybody who has like clairvoyance, people do have a gift, right? That they some people who are prescient, like they have very good insight into people, or sometimes can, have clear dreams and, kind of have that like sixth sense. It's a gift. Maybe some people say everybody has it, but for some people it's more cultivated than others. He had a gift to be able to connect with God. He could, and the Mishnah, the Midrash says, Balaam was able, he really was a bona fide, legitimate, sorcerer or prophet, or whatever you want to call him. But he couldn't really bless. He was able to curse, and he was able to really see into like people's lives, and he was a very close observer. Okay, there's a lot of eye talk, like I mentioned before already, seeing and insight. It's a gift to be able to do that. But for him, it was an unearned gift. Unearned. He squandered it. He spoiled it. Right? He didn't see that he could use it for good. He just took it for granted. And you can learn from that. So I learned this from one of my teachers. One of my favorite podcasts that I listen to is Rabbi Wolbe. It's called the Parashat Podcast. So I heard this one, and I'll pass it on to you. He says, and he usually quotes the Midrash, but problematically, this was unearned greatness. And unearned greatness can't be transformational. And we know that. Maybe you have a child or a loved one who things come easy to them. And sometimes when things come too easy to people, they take it for granted. So this is something that happened to him, that he didn't really have a chance to work on his gift. He just sort of was able to easily exploit it. And so the rabbi compares that to the Israelites. Think about when the Israelites were freed from Egypt. God, you could say it was an unearned right. It was an unearned gift. God promised this to the ancestors, right? To the ancient Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But did the Israelites feel that promise was fulfilled because of something that they did? It was fulfilled for the sake of the ancestors. So what happens when the Israelites go to Mount Sinai? They receive the Torah, which is the greatest gift they could ever receive, right? What happens right next? What happens almost immediately? It's a question. You can unmute. What did the Israelites do with that unearned gift of Torah right away? Are you thinking?
If folks, just because there are so many people, if folks want to unmute, just let us know. You can use the virtual raise hand button, or put in the chat that you'd like to. They're putting things in the chat.
Okay, I can't see the chat. So
I can read them.
Okay, go ahead.
Golden calf, did not value it. They took it for granted. Idols, worship false idols, golden calf.
Okay, I knew we had a smart group. Okay, so thank you, you ringers out there. Exactly. What happens when you have an unearned gift? Sometimes immediately you squander it. And that's exactly what they did. And what happens with the Israelites? 40 years, right? They have to travel. They have to become a people, become more cohesive, annoying God the entire way. But one could say that eventually, right, they earned it. Maybe even just by sticking with God, or thankfully that they had a good leader who wouldn't let them entirely go astray. All right, so let's look at some of these characteristics. All right, we'll take the first one. All right, we're comparing Avraham and Balaam. The very first depiction here, or this differentiation, is what does it look like to have a good eye, ayin tova, versus an ayin ra'ah, like an evil eye. And these words have to be sort of fleshed out a little bit more. So a good eye, we can understand, is generous spirits. Okay, hakarat hatov, gratitude. Right, there are a lot of different sort of ways of interpreting this good eye, which helps us only just to enlarge, expand our conversation, and also help us to perceive, no pun intended, the way we see these values landing on ourselves in our own lives. So Abraham, what does he see? What is his good eye? Well, I'm going to throw out a few, and then I'd like you to start thinking about, and you can put it in the chat also, how do you see that Abraham has a good eye or a generous spirit? Because I'm only giving a couple examples here. Number one, that he sees the power beyond the physical world, to be the first monotheist. Right? This isn't in the Torah at all, but why is Abraham even chosen? The Midrash says, because he sees beyond the physical world. Right? That beautiful Midrash, one of my favorite Midrashim, Abraham looks into this birah, this building, this palace, and he sees the palace is burning. And he's like, who is the master of this palace? Or he sees a light, an illumination. Like, who's living here? Who's the Baal Habayit here? That Abraham sees beyond this physical world, to see past the stars and the celestial bodies that were the Chaldeans were ruled by what they believed were, the stars. Abraham sees beyond the stars to see God, right? To even ask the question of, where is this God? So Abraham sees into, right, and sees beyond the physical world. That is a ayin tova, a good eye. A good eye is also a quality of faith, affirming that whisper of ki tov, because it's good, recited at creation and renewed every day. That's a beautiful piece I'll keep going back to from Siddur Lev Shalem, has a commentary. It's one of the newer Siddurim from the conservative movement. It's called Siddur Lev Shalem, and you can look at the commentary of Pirkei Avot there, and that's where that beautiful quote comes from. So what do we know from the Bible? That Abraham looked up, right? The story of the Akedah, and this was, I have these out of order. Never mind though, right? In the Akedah story where he's taking Isaac, and of course that story is challenging, but that Abraham looks up and he sees the place, makom merachok. Like he looks up and he sees God. He sees God's place. So that's seeing. Abraham also, he looks for opportunities to do mitzvah, to do good deeds, to serve God. Where do we see that? When he's recovering and he's sitting at the opening of his tent, right? Recovering from his circumcision, kachom hayom, in the heat of the day. Why is he sitting there? The Midrash says he's looking for angels. He's looking for guests. He's looking for orchim. He's looking for people to feed. And he looks up and he sees, right, these guests. He thinks they're people, right? They're angels, and brings them in, welcomes them into his home. Right? So he has that ability to see beyond his own physical pain, to see beyond his own physical experience, to see into and to welcome. He looks for opportunities. So do we have any other, anything else about Abraham's ability to express gratitude or to see the good? Anything else you want to put in the chat or to unmute?
Someone commented that he argues on behalf of the people of Stone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Yeah, we're going to look at that specific example next. So, yafeh. We have a prophet in the group. That's great.
And Tanya says he allowed God to guide his vision, and he followed that guidance.
Yes. Right? Beautiful. Okay, so let's move on. In contrast, what does it look like to have an ayin ra'ah? A grudging spirit, okay? An evil eye, all right? And I need to give this caveat, because when you're reading the book of, in the Torah, the text itself, we have only a few examples because, it's a short chapter. We don't know a lot about Balaam. This is what we know about Balaam, what's here. And when you're reading it, it's a little bit like you can look at him and see, like, is he that bad? Is he that awful? Like from the text itself, it doesn't seem like it. Like the rabbis are really, I don't want to say they're digging, because I want to say what they find as their examples are good enough as, the viciousness of Balaam, okay? But also it's helpful, I think, that there isn't like an overt statement of Balaam's character, of his negativity. It's not so overt, because that makes it even more real, right? When we think about our own actions and we think about people we know, right? There's a lot that goes on, like bubbling, underlying, that's sort of like, it's a leaning, it's a penchant, it's a tendency, right? We know consummate evil when we see it. We don't actually see it all the time, but we see penchant toward, proclivity toward, right? And that's when that's when we bring these texts to our own lives. Like, well, what does that proclivity look like in my own life, right? Right? So how do we see the evil eye, the begrudging spirit in Balaam? Well, there's a lot about eye, about sight, okay, and about vision, right, as it relates to Balaam and as it relates to this story. Even in the very beginning, where it says the king sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor in Pethor, which is in the Euphrates, in the land of his kinsfolk, to invite him, saying, this is Balak saying, there's a people that came out of Egypt, It hides the earth from view. Chisa et ein haaretz. It hides the eye, right? Which is like a really sort of vicious, sort of anti-Semitic, it's like they're swarming, it's like they're covering the face of the earth. They're like locusts, right? But the visual, okay, right, is the metaphor is like they're covering the eye of the land. Like you can't even see the property. You can only see these people. All right, so that's sort of how that light vort operates. It comes up again and again, like this notion of seeing, not seeing, okay? And so here, again, the connection to Abraham. I know whoever you bless will be blessed and who you curse will be cursed, right? Balaam, what is he? Is he Abraham? Right? The text sets him up with a lot of this overlapping language. So it's like it's a literary feast if you like to do literary analysis to really put these two, the narrative side by side of the Abraham story and the Balaam story. How do we see the infringement on sight, right? The inability to see play out in Balaam? Well, the classic example is the case of Balaam and riding his donkey, right? And to try to curse the people. So this is like this is the only talking donkey in the entire Bible, okay? But you could even ask, why is it here? Why is there a talking donkey at all? Where did this talking donkey come from? Well, it's one of the 10, Pirkei Avot talks about these miraculous things that were created at the twilight of before Friday night. One of them was the ram that Abraham slaughtered instead of Isaac. Okay, so that's another parallel there. And this talking donkey, right? It was a miracle created for this purpose. There are some others, it's a cool text, like the tongues the first tongues that were created. Like when you think about the first people who had to like pull something hot out of a fire, right? They needed tongues for that, like that was a miracle. And there are others as well. So this back to this idea of seeing. The donkey, the aton, or chamor, sees this angel of God standing in the way before Balaam sees it. And in fact, when you see something written 3 times in like a short text, you know that's an important idea. So I don't really like this word here, but so when the donkey caught sight of the angel of the Lord, right? And then again, when the donkey seeing the angel of the Lord, and now when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, all of this is taking place before Balaam's eyes were open, right? The fact that this animal, this donkey, can see what Balaam cannot see, that the donkey can see the angel of God, which you'd think a sorcerer, a prophet would have the ability to see God or the angel of God. No, he can't see it, but his donkey can, right? So really interesting text here on seeing and not seeing. And there are a couple of others. So there's also this idea that Balaam wants to see them. He wants to see, right? He believes he can see the Israelites, but not to bless them, to exploit them. He looks for a place to exploit and to undermine. That he could see very well. He could see faults, but he can't, on his own, he cannot see blessing. So what happens when Balaam tries to see the negativity, when he tries to see that negativity with the ayin ra? Each time he opens his mouth to curse, which is 4 times in total, he ends up blessing instead of cursing. And each time the curse or the blessing is framed in seeing. So here's one in chapter 24, verses 1-4. Now Balaam, seeing that it was good, vaya'ar Balaam, right there, ki tov b'nei Adonai, that it was good in the eyes of God to bless Israel, did not, as on previous occasions, go in search of omens, but he turned his face to the wilderness. And as Balaam looked up and saw, right, it's again and again really hitting us over the head. He sees them in camp there. And what does it say? That the word of the man whose eye is true. So Ne'um HaGever Shatum Ha'ayin. Very strange. What does that mean? Shatum Ha'ayin? It's translated here as whose eye is true. But the Midrash explains that actually he had a pierced eye. That's another way of explaining this. It's a pierced eye. So is it a pierced eye like he had piercing like laser vision? Maybe. Or is it that he actually had like some kind of deformity, that he had a pierced eye, that he actually only had one eye? And maybe the text is maybe poking fun at him, perhaps, but that it's actually pierced. And so the vision that he has is it's not 20/20. Okay, it's already sort of clouded. Okay, but it's flipped. And some people might say it's saginahor. It's like you say something that's positive, but it's really pointing to something that's negative. Okay, so either he had this like only one eye that was operative, or it was like this piercing vision. Okay, and the only way that he is ever able to see is when God opens his eyes, like unveils his eyes. And that's kind of like the archetype of, in many of these kinds of like the blind seer, right? It's that God is showing him, God rolls away the obstacle in order for him to see. And so that locution is used a number of times in the text. Okay. So he can't see on his own. He can only see what God shows him. All right. So we're going to look next. Okay. Pause quickly. Comments or questions?
There was a comment that I'll read out loud. Could the donkey represent the concept of purity of faith, not intellectual understanding of faith, but faith without the necessity of convincing?
Yes, that's really well said. Yeah, that's a beautiful statement. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have a comment or question they wanted to ask?
Okay.
There is a hand raised. Jennifer?
Okay, go ahead.
This is, first of all, thank you. Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous lecture. Thank you. And thank you, Julie, for giving us the opportunity. This is such a technical question, but because I'm always fascinated by the commentary that you select, where in Sepharia, when I go to commentary, and maybe others of you have had this experience, and it'll say, oh, Rashi commented on this. I'll only get it in the Hebrew. How did you get it to where you saw Rashi's Hebrew commentary, but also the English translation?
Okay, it's a very good technical question. And I think maybe, Julie, if you could put that into the chat.
Thank you.
Okay. So, it is there, but I guess you need to, I can't explain it well. All right, so I'd like to just move on a little bit more. Tanya, do you have your hand up?
Yes, Rabbi. I just think it's really interesting you brought out that the king Balak saw the Israelites as a threat and as a horde that would lick them up as oxen. But when we get to the Ma Tovu portion, Balaam goes, how godly are your tents, O Jacob. And it's the way God sees the Jewish people. A lot of times the world has an adverse view. Much like Pharaoh back during the Egyptians, he saw them as these people too numerous. He saw them as a threat. But this is especially important now when the world criticizes Israel. But, God sees Jacob's people as beautiful people.
Yeah. Well said. Amen. Amen. Right. And that it's always this sort of a strange concept, like we are, whatever, less like 1% or, in the world population, and yet we're perceived as like, running everything and swarming. It's like, doesn't quite make sense.
Balaam says it was a nation that stands alone in one of his prophetic utterances. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of times throughout history, the Israelites and the Jews were a people who stood alone, especially during World War II when no one would take them prior to the Holocaust. None of the nations wanted the Jews.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's really well said. Very important. Okay, so let's take, because we have a lot to do in just a few more minutes, so I'll just try to go through this a little more quickly, but there are two more attributes that are compared. So ruach, the humble spirits, okay? What does humility look like for Abraham? A humble soul, is the quality that seeks to understand and be part of the world's most exalted dreams. Oh, I love that. So where do we see humility? Someone mentioned this earlier, that when Abraham is arguing with God, which takes a lot of chutzpah to begin with, right? A lot of hubris, but he doesn't do it that way. Anochi afar ve'efer, he says, Abraham knows his place. I'm but ashes and dust, right? That's how he presents his argument, from a place of great modesty, great humility, right? Even though what he's trying to accomplish is like pretty significant, okay? There's also this really interesting idea here that it says, Va'avraham shav lemekomo, that he returned to his place, versus Balaam, when he tries to curse the Israelites, he keeps moving around. He thinks, maybe if I go over here, I'll see them better. Maybe if I go over here, I'll see them better. He moves around, he shifts, he thinks it's something about him, right? His ability to bless or curse that's going to be different based on where he stands. Abraham knows it doesn't matter where he goes. God is with him. He returns to his place. It's not about him. It's about the place, Lemekomo actually means God, okay? He returns, it's like returning to God. It's another way of reading that God is with him. Okay, so also where do we see humility vis-a-vis Abraham? That when he is appealing to, in Hebron for the burial place, the burial plot for Sarah, he bows before the community there, before the leaders, and he's willing to pay more than, it's not about him, it's about the mission, okay, of accomplishing the purchasing, the acquiring of that burial place, okay? So his posture of bowing and his ability to just give whatever is required without imposing too much of his ego or anything like that. On the opposite extreme, Balaam is seen as arrogant. He's seen as arrogant. Where do we see that? He thinks he's in control. I mean, that's the whole farce about Balaam. He thinks he's got this. Where does he see that? That the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, so they set out and they came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. And they said to him, he said to them, spend the night here and I'll let you know what God says. Okay? So then God appeared to Balaam and said, what do these people want from you? Mi ha'anashim ha'ela imach. Who are these people? Where do you recognize that statement? I'm just going to throw questions out, but I'm going to move a little more quickly now. We've seen this before. When God asks a human a question, it's rhetorical, okay? God knows who these people are. But Balaam thinks this is an opportunity to respond. Oh, these people. Oh, God, you don't know who these people are? Oh, King Balak has sent these messengers. I'm a real big deal. I'm an important guy, right? The kings all want me, right? How about you, God? And then he also believes, because God is asking this question, that maybe there's something that God doesn't know. He thinks like, chas v'shalom, there's something that God doesn't know. So he keeps that in mind as like, I'm going to pay attention to when God, is turning away, all right? Because there are things that clearly God doesn't know, right? This is the hubris speaking. This is the arrogance speaking, right? This is not a tzaddik. This is not a righteous person who would even, dare to answer the question, okay? We see this happen three times in the Bible. When God asks, like in the case of Cain and Abel, where's your brother? You think God doesn't know where his brother is, right? Am I my brother's keeper? Balaam, who answers the question, and in the story of Hezekiah. So, and you can look at those here. And that full Rashi is on Rashi 3:9, when God says to Adam in the Garden of Eden, Ayeka, where are you? Right? It's an existential question. When God asks you a question like that, it doesn't really need an answer. Okay. So next, finally, appetite, okay? Abraham has a modest appetite and Balaam is greedy. How do we see that played out? And here's a beautiful quote. A modest appetite is the quality of humility that seeks to be content to all that exists and knows that one needs to. That doesn't seem right. I'll fix that before we leave. Okay, it's all about meeting the other. Okay, about meeting the other, like living in this world. How do we live in this world? Okay, so where do we see that like contentness, all right, that Abraham has? So we see it here between him and Lot. When each of them have, you know, him and his cousin, they each have like a lot of property, and he gives Lot the better lands, the more like green pastures, and he takes for himself whatever's left over, right? He's not going to argue with Lot about, you know, who gets the better lands, right? They're both wealthy. They both have a lot, and Abraham doesn't need more than, you know, doesn't need more than Lot has. You go your own way, take the better lands. There's a text that the rabbis point out where he sees, you know, when they're going into Egypt and he sees how beautiful his wife is. And the text says there's sort of like almost suddenly, like Abraham looks at Sarah and he's like, oh, well, I see what a beautiful woman you are. What does that suggest? That he sees her for a moment through other people's eyes, that he never like even noticed that she had external beauty. He loved her spirit. He loved her soul, right? They were soulmates. He connected with her as a whole person, that he didn't connect with the external, right? That beauty aspect, the aesthetic, you know, never even occurred to him. So that's what the rabbis go with that in terms of a modest appetite. It's just not what he focused on, okay? And finally, in the end of Abraham's life, it says that Abraham was blessed bakol. He was blessed with everything, bakol. What a beautiful idea, to be satisfied in life, that there was nothing else he ever needed. He had it all, right? What a blessing that we should strive to attain for ourselves. Versus Balaam, who has incredible greed. And where do the rabbis see that? Because when Balak's officials come to him, they keep saying, oh, well, you know, will you do it for this amount? Maybe you'll do it for more. And that Balak sort of feeds them the idea, oh, even if you gave me all your entire a house full of silver and gold, meaning his house of silver and gold, that he's not just greedy, he's covetous. He wants what other people have. He wants their wealth, okay? And he figures out, well, you're going to hire an army, you know, might as well give all that money to me. So he plants the idea of like how much he really wants, and he's going to hold out until he gets that final offer. Okay, I think we're at our time. So I think we'll just leave that here then for any, I'll leave a moment for any additional questions. I think I do want to just throw this in here, that the message of the donkey, okay? In Hebrew, a donkey is a chamor, okay? In Hebrew, a donkey is chamor. And it's a word that's related to chomer. Chomer means material. And so when you think about that like parable or this narrative of Balaam and the donkey, right? The donkey owns him. The material owns him. It knows more than him. It controls him, right? It sees what he doesn't see, versus who else rides on a donkey in our tradition? Melech Mashiach, right? Messiah, Moses, Abraham, right? Those are instances of the material is controlled, that the spirit body controls the material. They hold the reins, right? When we go back to the beginning text that we looked at, what do you have in your hands? If you can control that materiality of our world, of that, you know, of the chomer of the world, you know, that to ride the donkey, right, means to be in control of the material and not to let the material control you. So my blessing for us is that we see ourselves as the disciples of Abraham, not the disciples of Balaam, and very well recognizing that if there's a little bit of Balaam going on, to take control of it and to try to eradicate it as best as we can.